had some kind of code. Some honor. And look at you now. Enough reminiscing. Move out and draw fire, soldier!
Hello and welcome to another video review, and today I am finally reviewing Resident Evil 4 Remake. It's been a long road to this remake. I think it was announced back like maybe a month after the Resident Evil 3 remake came out that, hey, we're gonna remake Resident Evil 4, which, you know, there's kind of two camps to this. There was a lot of people that were super excited, obviously. Resident Evil 4, for some people, Resident Evil 4 is their favorite game of all time. You know, for Resident Evil fans, there's a lot of Resident Evil fans out there that will say Resident Evil 4 is their favorite Resident Evil of all time. And then there's the other camp that really wants Code Veronica. I'm in that camp. And, you know, I'm also in a camp that doesn't like Resident Evil 4 as much as a lot of people do. So, you know, I have more of a unique perspective, especially on this remake, than I think a lot of the critical reviews out there do, because it's kind of the same thing again almost 20 years later. It's, you know, 10 out of 10s, masterpiece, you know, remake of one of the greatest games of all time. It's just even better, and I don't share that opinion like at all when it comes to Resident Evil 4, and we're gonna discuss that today. First of all, like, what is my opinion of this remake? But I think it's important to put that out there before I get into the nitty-gritty, that I am not a huge fan of Resident Evil 4. Like, I am, obviously, you guys know on the channel, I'm a diehard Resident Evil fan. You guys know my favorite video game of all time is the original Resident Evil, specifically the GameCube remake, you know, where we had an excellent HD remaster of it back in 2015. I love that game to death, and there is part of me that would actually kind of like to see them remake that game like Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 here, in that style, over the shoulder. I think it'd be really cool. I'm super open for it. It would be fun to play the game in that perspective, especially since there was that one Lost in Nightmares DLC in Resident Evil 5 where you kind of got to go through and experience that a little bit with kind of a remade mansion. That was really cool. So it gives me, you know, something. I think about that sometimes where I'm like, yeah, I'd be okay with that. But I'd also really like to see Code Veronica. But more than ever now, I want to see Resident Evil 5. So, because, you know, controversially, not only is Resident Evil 4 one of my least favorite, Resident Evil 5 is my second favorite Resident Evil of all time, and I'd argue one of the best games of all time. So, and a lot of people do not share that opinion with me. So, anyways, let's dive into Resident Evil 4 Remake. First thing off the bat that I'll say, you know, kind of disappointed me about it, I think that demo they put out a couple weeks, like 2 weeks before this game came out, was excellent because it kind of showed how they retooled the beginning of this game. And I really thought when I played through that demo, I'm like, oh, maybe they're going to change some stuff about the story here. Maybe they're really going to retool it and do something different, when it kind of like Final Fantasy VII Remake has done, with at least the first part of that. No, that's not the case with this game at all. It's like they do a little bit of that in the beginning, and then it's like they had ideas for that and just said, fuck it, we need to remake Resident Evil 4. And they just did that for the rest of the game. That's a bummer to me. So I think a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but for me that was a bummer because I really wanted to see, like, well, what else can we do? That being said, again, for better or worse, it's Resident Evil 4 again. And one of my biggest problems with this game, and I had the same problem almost 20 years ago when the original version came out, and it's still true to today, is babysitting Ashley. It's just not fun. And they tried to make it a little bit better and a little more manageable here in this version of the game, but I still think it's bad. Nothing was more telling to me than when you get to the castle for the first time. First thing that happens when I turn around the corner, boom, a rocket hits Ashley and kills her, and I'm just like, yep, this is the Resident Evil 4 I remember. And it's just frustrating. It's a little bit better. I'll say this, like, I recently played through 4 maybe 2 years ago, that like Xbox One version that came out, and it is a little bit easier, a little bit more fun to manage Ashley in this version than it was in that, but it's still not good. Like, it's still very painful at times, and it just reminds me, I'm like, man, it'd be so much better if somebody else was controlling her, you know, kind of like Resident Evil 5 where it's just a fucking co-op game. But again, I digress. It's a problem I have with Resident Evil 4, and it's still present in the remake. The second problem I've always had with Resident Evil 4, and again, still apparent in this remake, is the game shifts its tone and focus too much. The game has I'll admit, the game has an excellent hook in the beginning where it kind of brings you into this world, to this European town where shit's really fucked up, and there's all these cultists and village people attacking you in the beginning, and that whole like beginning sequence is still fucking fantastic. And I still think that, again, the first like third of this game until you get to the point where you get Ashley is really fucking good. Then you get Ashley and the game kind of shifts focus again, and it becomes the babysitter. You know, you're babysitting her throughout different areas, and that gets tedious and tiresome. And as that's happening, the game focus is shift again. The game's focus shifts once again, and you get introduced, you know, at a certain point to Krauser, which it starts to bring more of the action elements into this game. Which, again, I know a lot of people are like, well, Resident Evil 4 was kind of what did it for survival horror. It was basically going from 3, which was just a survival horror game, to 4, which is a action survival horror game. Like, that's what people are going to argue, and I get that, I understand that, but it gets really action heavy. I mean, you get to the point where you're literally fighting army dudes and commando dudes, you know, that have guns and impeccable accuracy, I might say, even though they're all fucked in the head with this disease. So, and one of the biggest problems I've always had is, you know, when you get to Resident Evil 5, that was one of the biggest complaints a lot of people had in 5 was that. And it's like, all that shit's in the end portion of Resident Evil 4. But the game's praised as a masterpiece. But Resident Evil 5, it's like, how fucking dare they? Like, it never made sense to me, that horrible, like, well, they did it over here, it's okay, but not over here. You know, so there's that. And the game kind of shifts its focus there. And it, you know, but even before then, it does shift its focus from like weird, creepy European town to like cultist. And even that part of the game is still interesting and fun. They do a better job here, I think, in the remake of really hammering home the cultist part of the game. It's fucking creepy at times. It's creepy. It's kind of terrifying at times. I'll admit that. And like just weird shit they do. Like the chanting was always unsettling back in the original. I think it's even better here in this version of the game. All the sequence in the castle, really fun. Again, when you're not babysitting Ashley. And then, of course, the end part you get to is where, for me, the game falls apart, which is, again, fighting Krauser. I will say also, like, the Krauser fight's cool because it reminds me of almost like a Metal Gear Solid fight. The issue I have with it is you don't get enough of the backstory of Krauser in this game to warrant a Metal Gear Solid type fight. And I always thought that was weird. It's like, okay, for your average Resident Evil fan when Resident Evil 4 came out, how the fuck were you going to know who Krauser is? You know what I mean? Like, now we have books and you know, stories and stuff that you could read on the side to get the backstory of Krauser, but that wasn't a thing back in 2005. So, like, it doesn't make sense to me why they would give him a Metal Gear Solid type fight, but it's an interesting sequence, and I still think it's really good here too. And then you get to the frustrating end boss with Sadler. It's, you know, it's the same fight from 20 years ago. It kind of goes over the story of the game. Again, do I hate Resident Evil 4? Not at all. I'm not somebody who will sit here and say, oh, that game fucking sucks. That's not the case. It's just not my favorite Resident Evil. And I think it does have a lot of glaring problems that people overlook because they look back on this game with rose-tinted glasses and they go, well, you know, it came out at a time, it changed everything. You know, it changed how we play action games. It did. It totally did. Without Resident Evil 4, we wouldn't have Gears of War. We wouldn't even have that entire franchise if it wasn't for Resident Evil 4. So I get that it changed action games, and I respect it for that, but it's still not my favorite Resident Evil, and this remake didn't do much to change my opinion. Other things I want to touch on in this review, most of the voice acting is really good and it works. Like they brought back the dude that voiced Leon in the 2 remake. He's fantastic here. Like I had no problem with him. Whoever does Ashley, she's fine. Hennigan, you know, that's fine. all of the bad guys, like whoever they brought is in Ramon Salazar, he's pretty good. He sounds very similar to the original guy. Whoever they got to play Sadler, I did not care for until the end of the game when he gets his transformation. Then he sounded okay, but in the beginning I'm just like, oh man, he doesn't sound good. So I'm just like, oh man. But the voice that I think is the most disappointing, and I don't mean any disrespect to this person, so don't take it this way. Whoever is the voice of Ada Wong didn't do it for me. Like, Ada Wong has a specific voice, and in here, the performance was just flat for me. You know, it was kind of like, okay, Leon, we got to go do this. Okay, Leon, you know, and it's just like, I expected more out of it. Like, even in the 2 remake, like, I thought the voice acting there was good for Ada. It doesn't work here. It's not good, and, like, I just wish it wasn't so flat. I also got to get used to, this is a minor spoiler, but I mean, this is a almost 20-year-old game, so at the same time, you've probably played Resident Evil 4. Whoever they got to voice Wesker, there's only 2 portions of the game where you hear him, and only 1 portion where you see him. I'm going to have to get used to that voice because I've fucking played a lot of Resident Evil 5 and I'm used to this very bombastic Wesker voice, and this is a little more restrained. It still has the evil sound to it, but not in the same way. And I would assume they're going to take whoever does this voice, if they're remaking 5, and they'll put that voice in there, and that's fine. But whoever it is, they did a decent job, so... and then finally, the last character I'll touch on is the merchant. He is in this game. He's also not as bombastic as the original voice actor, and he repeats his lines a little too much. There's not enough of the stranger, you know. There's a little bit of that, but not enough where I was like happy. I guess like I wanted more of that, you know. And there's a couple lines he kind of repeats way too much. Yeah, I don't know. He was fine. He could have been a little better. I think he could have been more bombastic. You know, have a little more command of that role, if you will. Especially if you sat that person down and showed them, like, hey, this is what he sounded like 20 years ago. You should try to be like that, but maybe even more over the top, you know. So, that kind of covers the voice work, though. I played this game on the Series X. I will say it did have, you know, when the game came out, it did have the dead zone issue. I didn't really notice it at first until the patch came out that fixed it. And then it was like, holy shit, how have I been playing this game this entire time? Because I will admit, once that happened, I realized, like, wow, was missing a lot of shots and stuff. Again, like, they did add the mercenaries mode, and that's kind of the other thing I want to touch on. Like, well, you know, I have my problems with Resident Evil 4 and its story and everything. Mercenaries mode is so fucking good. And I will always claim that Resident Evil 5 has the greatest version of mercenaries mode. It's fucking phenomenal playing that with 2 people. But here they've done a really good job finally of remaking it. They tried to put a mercenaries mode in Village. It did not work for me in first person at all. It was too slow and clunky. It didn't make sense. This is fucking fantastic. Yes, there's a little bit of dirtiness with it because they cut out 2 of the characters that probably are going to be DLC later when they release the very obvious Separate Ways Ada Wong campaign, which is very noticeably absent in this remake, but it still plays really fucking good. It's missing 1 map and 2 characters, which are Wesker and Ada, so they'll be in it later, I'm sure, and I can't wait to play as those characters in this mode. But like, I literally, the day that went up, like, I did the podcast and then I just spent time just unlocking those characters and beating that for those levels, and I've had a blast of mercenaries. But I'll be honest, that's one of the reasons that delayed my review of this game is I had a hard time getting back to it when I get to the parts that I don't like a Resident Evil remake. So when I load up the game, I'd be like, well, I'll just do a round of Mercs mode first, and that would lead to 4 or 5 rounds of Mercs mode, and then I'd play like a half hour and be like, I gotta go to bed, you know. So that was one of the reasons why it took me so long to get this review done and at least finish my first playthrough, is because I just wanted to play Mercs mode. If I could review that on its own, I mean, that's an A+. Like, but I'm a huge fan of the Mercenaries mode. I even like that 3DS game. I thought, like, if they would have put that out on a console, that would have been excellent. So, Um, Resident Evil 4, like, what am I gonna give this game? It's a remake. It's a remake of a beloved classic game that I just don't share in the opinion that it should be at that status. So for me, it's a B plus. I think that's fair. I know there are going to be people like, and they're going to throw a fit. But again, you have to, it's my opinion. B, I already am not the biggest fan of Resident Evil 4. So going into this, it was like, okay, now it's just Resident Evil 4 again, but it looks better, And I will say, like, visually, the game looks stunning. They did, with that first patch, they did kind of downgrade the visuals on performance mode a little bit. It is noticeable. They added kind of a motion blur effect that you cannot turn off, and that's a big pet peeve of mine because I hate and cannot stand motion blur in video games. But again, like, it's still working, it still plays great. So that part of the game, though, visuals, like, again, the re-engine is fucking phenomenal. I want to see a Dino Crisis remake in this engine. I want to see Resident Evil 5 remade in this engine. And for the love of God, remake Code Veronica. I want to see, it's the only one that has not had a proper, like, remake or anything. So B plus for this, though. I think again, if you're a Resident Evil fan, if you're a fan of the series, if you're a fan of Resident Evil 4, if it's your favorite game of all time, I don't think you're going to find much to complain about in this remake. So for me, though, again, they didn't do enough to really change my opinion of the game that I already had. So B plus. I'd love to know in the comments below, is Resident Evil 4 your favorite game? Do you share my opinion about Resident Evil 4? Am I too critical of the game? Let me know. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.